Hey guys, Taylor here. So the purpose of this video is basically going to be to walk through the installation and uh, kind of overview of the Engineering Everything E9x, E8x upgraded fuel filter regulator assembly. So effectively, this part is striving to complete one main goal, which is to improve overall flow through the driver's side fuel sending unit Tophat assembly on the E90 platform cars. The factory unit on that side has a built-in fuel filter, a built-in fuel pressure regulator, and primarily a large contributor to its reduced performance is it has a what's called a feed side suction pump. So this car uses a bit of a saddle tank design, so it requires using a suction pump, siphon pump, jet pump. All these are synonyms that you may hear, Venturi, but effectively a vacuum operated siphon pump to draw fuel from the driver's side of the tank over to the passenger side of the tank where the fuel pump actually is. So this piece does three main things. It gets rid of the built-in fuel filter, so you'll have an external fuel filter now. It gets rid of the built-in fuel pressure regulator, so you'll be responsible for running an aftermarket fuel pressure regulator. And it moves the siphon pump from the feed side, aka the pump feed, out of the fuel tank, which obviously would have a direct reduction in pump flow. It moves that from the feed side over to the return side, so it doesn't have a hindrance on the amount of flow available from your pump. There are some nuances having installed it and worked with it a little bit. So my goal here is to basically just provide a video guide on how to assemble the Tophat, which includes scavenging some parts from your existing factory Tophat and then assembling those parts as well as some included pieces to build up the rest of the Tophat assembly. There's also some plumbing elements to this. Now that we're moving the Venturi to the return side, it does include a new Venturi jet pump. Again, these are all synonyms, but it includes a new one of those and some new hoses to accommodate that new jet pump. My goal is basically kind of break this up into maybe three main steps. So the first one, what I'll do is I'll go through a walkthrough of just how to build up the Tophat, the actual mechanical elements of putting that Tophat together. The next bit of what I want to do is lay out my bucketed fuel pump system. So that's in my case two 450s using Performance Fuel Solutions parts, but this would be the same for a single pump, a stock pump, a Precision Raceworks kit, doesn't matter. We're going to lay out the fuel pumps. We're going to go over the crossover lines that go between the fuel pumps and the upgraded filter regulator assembly from Engineering Everything. And then we'll talk about how those connect to that upgraded Tophat on the driver's side. Once we go through all that on the floor, and I can go through some of the nuance and detail about the procedure and the kind of tips and tricks I've found along the way of how to do this, we'll go ahead and get everything installed in the car, and I'll try to show you if there's anything pertinent to show during that installation. I'll try to show that, but otherwise we'll show you the finished product once it's all done, and trying to just give you guys a guide here of what I feel are helpful tips and pointers to have when you put this whole kit together. It's a pretty lower volume thing at the moment on who all is using this, so I'm just trying to get as much information for other folks as I can, as I've learned and experienced it. So if there's anything I've missed, feel free to drop it below, leave a comment. I'm going to try to add timestamps, so if there's only certain parts of this that you need to complete your install, you can jump ahead as you feel necessary. But otherwise, we'll go ahead and get into the physical kind of build up of the actual Tophat next. And then, like I said, after that, we'll move on to looking at all the parts on the ground to see what our layout's going to look like. So thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next part.
All right, what's up, guys? Continuing on with the Engineering Everything E9x Tophat install kind of guide. What I wanted to go over here is just kind of the mechanical assembly of the main part of the Tophat. So I'm kind of mid work on mine right now. So there's some things like not zip tying this up that we can look past, but this will get you the main gist of it that you need to know for the sake of how to put this together. So you got your main Tophat. It's going to ship with this bracket already attached to it with these two bolts. You can ignore this. I'm working through some stuff with Ryan over there at Engineering Everything. Work through some distances and height here. It seems like in my particular car, the provided length of this rod was a bit too long, which made the fuel arm kind of sit up too high, making the car think it had more fuel than it actually did. So I've modified this in this case, but working through them with that. In any case, main components here. So you've got your two barbs. These feed the outlets on the top. So your feed here, your return here. In my case, I run a -8 feed, a -6 return using the radium low profile fittings. These fittings are supplied with the kit. These are 1/8 NPT to 3/8 barb. I use this sealant on these called Gasoila, I think is how you say it, but this is used specifically E10, E85 fuel, so it's basically everything out of a pump. These days will be compatible with that. I just put a little bit on the threads, run those in, tighten them up, easy peasy. Next piece, I guess you could look at this rod here, this kind of stick looking rod. This is a part of your stock top hat. In the stock top hat, this is going to be this kind of circular, or not circular, but 180 degree kind of U-shaped piece, kind of snaps up into a plastic boss on the stock top hat. So you're basically going to pop that out of the stock piece, and this kit basically just uses 2 bolts to affix it kind of around the U. So down at the other end, you've got the same kind of thing, a U-shaped bend there. On this side of the rod from factory, you'll have it's called a jet pump. The factory jet pump lives here. Same kind of thing. It just pops into the plastic. You can rip it out of the plastic. And then the same deal, uses 2 bolts to bolt to the new kind of welded pickup screen. So basically that's just a screened fitting. That's just going to sit on the bottom of the tank and act as the suction point to pull fuel from this side of the tank over to the pump side of the tank. Next piece is the pickup arm itself. Again, like I said, you can ignore the bolts and stuff here, working through the sizing of this bracket right now. But effectively, the stock pickup arm here in black, or the pickup sender in black, and the factory unit, this part clips in. This whole black assembly clips into the factory arm, relatively simple to unclip. And then with this particular kit, you can kind of see right above my thumb, there's these kind of 2 square windows that have a hole in the center. So this kit just uses these 2 small machine screws that bolt into some threaded holes on the bracket to hold it down. There's not a lot of play in there, so you don't have to worry about specific alignment, and then that'll all work as it should. The last thing to look at is the wiring. So your factory sender will have a plug that goes into the bottom of the top hat, I believe, for most instances. You'll end up cutting that plug off, and then if you do it with a long enough bit of wire here, you probably won't need to make extensions like I've done. But effectively, you'll end up wiring the included ring terminals with the kit to the bottom of each stud. It doesn't matter which polarity. With a sensor like this, it's just a resistive deal, so it doesn't matter left, right, positive, negative. That's not really the thing with this. One tip that I would recommend is, obviously, given that you have to get rid of the connector on the bottom, means you're also getting rid of your factory connector on the top of the top hat. And rather than just taking that stock connector, cutting it, and putting these ring terminals directly on those wires, I opted to put a small extension of wire with a little Deutsch connector on this. So that way I could tighten these nuts up kind of against each other. So that way I could be sure that I tighten these up as best I could without these studs that go through with these kind of white Teflon washers to seal it. That way those studs don't spin inside the top hat, which is pretty common with this style of thing. You could basically, by doing it this way, you can tighten this top nut against the bottom nut and make sure this is nice and snug. And every time you need to take this out, you just unplug it here rather than having to constantly undo these connections. So that's the gist of it. That gets your basic assembly of the top hat done. In the next portion of the video, I'll basically go over how to get the fuel bucket pump assembly set out, looking at the crossover lines, how those connect to the bucket and the pump, both for the feed and the return, the jet pump configuration, all those kinds of things, and then how this piece here interfaces with those crossover lines and kind of the order of operations in which I think makes the most sense. So when we get ready for that, I'll cut back in here with that bit of video, but this should cover the main assembly of the top hat from Engineering Everything. All right, guys, continuing on from where we started off or ended off on the last part where we worked on the mechanical assembly of the top hat there. I wanted to do this part where I lay out kind of all three major pieces here. So got our bucketed fuel pump system. In my case, that's Performance Fuel Solutions dual in-tank system. This would work for a stock pump. This would work for a single aftermarket pump from Precision Raceworks, DIY, as long as it has a 5/16 quick disconnect outlet. If the stock does, this will work fine. We've got the Engineering Everything Venturi. With this Venturi, you're provided this straight barb, and the straight barb right here under this clamp. These are all 1/8 NPT to 3/8 barbs, just like the two there. In my case, what I've chose to do, I bought a stainless steel 1/8 NPT male to 1/8 NPT female 90-degree connector, just to make it so that the line routing for the two lines going this direction, they're basically the same length, and it's just a lot less bulky here than having a straight and having to have, this line do one of these big wraparounds. Having them roughly the same length definitely helps when you get to this side, so you don't have like this line, which would be normal length. If you had this line do a big loop, it would end up much shorter on the other side, which kind of can create some strange things too. In my case, what I've chose to do, go ahead and click the feed fitting on. If your hose here doesn't come with a fitting like this, this is just 5/16 female quick disconnect. Sometimes you'll see them called Bundy connectors, to 3/8 barb. Slip that on there. Use one of these little ear clamps to hold that down. Maybe straight, maybe 90, whatever works best. They all would probably work the same. So you click that on first, and then affix your feed line. Now, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you start from the pump side and work over. And the reason I do that is because when you put the pump down, put the top hat down with the two stakes that go down on the little side portions here, the pump assembly is fixed in location. It can't move around in the fuel tank. So it makes sense to start your lines on this side because it's a fixed location for the line. And if there's any extra slack or whatever, it can kind of just naturally rest on the passenger side, on the driver's side of the tank, because there are no fixed points other than the barbs. The slack can otherwise just live there. So in my case, I'm starting from the feed line, clicking that on, to be able to identify which line is which on this side, because they're all three the same length, all three the same aesthetic. In my case, what I've done on the feed line is I've put just 2 small zip ties, and that's what I know to be my feed. So when we get over here, this is the hose with the 2 zip ties that will connect to this barb, which is our 8AN feed going out. The inlet to the siphon pump is here, this line right here. And on this line, I've chose to put a single zip tie. So that's return fuel from the engine. With that, I know that I'll connect this hose to this barb here, which is the 6AN return in my case. And then the last hose is this one here, which is the siphon, which is pulling fuel this direction and will come to this side, which no zip tie on this one. That's going to connect here, which siphons fuel off the bottom of the driver's side of the tank. So the little trick with the zip ties just makes it so when you push all 3 of these lines from the pump side across the tank, you know which line's which when you get to the driver's side and you need to go make these connections to the top hat. Another little bit, I believe most of the kits you get are going to come with a relatively short hose for this portion, something like maybe 6 inches. I opt to buy, this is from Amazon company Boost Monkey, I think, but this is 250 millimeters or about 10 inches. I buy this instead of the included part, and I do that so that way I can route it all the way into the bottom of the tank. So that ensures that rather than having it rest right here where it could potentially shoot the return fuel outside of the bucket or it blow up or fall out or something like that, it's buried down in the bucket, not going to go anywhere, and we know that the return fuel is going where we want it. To kind of ensure that this jet pump doesn't clack around in the tank, if you don't secure it, it absolutely will. Ask me how I know. All I've done is just put a couple zip ties on this side, a couple zip ties on this side, holding the return from the engine, jet pump, and return to the bucket hose to the feed line here. And so when this all goes in the tank, these will effectively get bundled together. I'll put a nice zip tie here, and that'll go from the driver or the passenger side over towards the driver's side. One little comment in terms of zip tying those together, I'll go ahead and do one here while I've got the camera rolling, and you can just take my word for the rest of it. But effectively, what you want to do is use a large format zip tie for bundling these lines together. So something that's a bit wider, wide enough that it won't get stuck down in the grooves of this tube. And then when you tighten it, don't cinch it down super tight. Leave it loose enough so these tubes can kind of, move next to one another as you push them through the tank, as you connect them to the top hat, things like that. So I'll go ahead and take one of these zip ties, go ahead and get my lines kind of stacked up in like a bundle of 3, and then very lightly, not even snugging it up, leaving it very loose, almost circular. I'll leave it just like that. And that way, these lines, this zip tie can move. These lines can still kind of shuttle on each other a little bit. That's what I'm trying to aim for. And I might do 2 of these kind of across the length of the tubes just to keep the bundle a little bit together. But I'm not going to stress too much about tying them together the whole way, just because it'll be helpful when we get to the top hat side of the tank to have some slack, because obviously these are all going to terminate at different points. We'll need the lengths to be different lengths. But effectively, this is what you're going to end up with. Your pump assembly here, your assembled jet pump there, where our return fuel comes in here. Our siphon fuel from this side of the tank comes here through this bottom hose into the side, combines with the return fuel from the engine, and dumps into the bucket there. And then our feed comes out of our pump, runs all the way out on the long line with the 2 zip ties to the feed port. So this is pretty much it. I'm going to go ahead and work on getting all of this bit installed in the tank, and then I'll come back with a bit of video when I've got these 3 lines poking out of the driver's side top hat, and I go make my connections here to finish out the install. All right, guys, back again. Wanted to cut back in here. So I've got my fuel pump installed over here with the lines connected on this side as I showed in the previous clip. Those lines are coming out. As you can see, my big zip tie, the leftmost big zip tie I showed you is right here. And obviously you have quite a lot of slack. As I said, all that's going to kind of just end up floating in this space. Just wanted to butt in here real quick. One tip that might be helpful: put some temporary zip ties to bundle these hoses tight together. So when you shove them across the tank, it's a relatively narrow gap along the front edge of the fuel tank here that you have to shove these lines through. Bundling them together like that definitely helps. So just wanted to point that out. I'll go ahead and
get these lines connected to the bottom of the top hat as I described in the other bit. And then I'll show you what that looks like before stabbing that back in the tank. All right, guys, cutting in here. So again, big zip tie I put in the previous clips down there. And these are the 3 lines. So the one with no zip tie, as I mentioned, goes to my siphon pickup here. The one with the 1 zip tie is my return fitting. It goes to the 6A. One with 2 zip ties goes to my feed fitting, which is my 8. All these lines I'm going to leave loose like this. So as this gets tucked in the tank, these can just kind of flow and rest where they want to. It won't cause any harm. They don't have enough mass, and they're obviously plastic, so they don't make a bunch of racket or anything like that when they're in the fuel. But otherwise, once you get this top hat seated, that's about it. We'll get that installed, show you what that looks like, and then wrap this up. All right, guys, one last thing I wanted to show you. So, try to get my light down in here. When you go to set this in here, try to spend some care to get the slack of the fuel lines kicked up, over, out, and towards the left. So again, I'll back up so you can see the frame that I'm talking about. That's the center of the car. So we're kind of pushing the fuel lines up towards the saddle. Oh, geez. Amateur videography. But we want to make sure they get pushed that way, because otherwise, if you push it straight down, what can happen is these lines the slack can push this way, and what'll happen then is it'll get stuck on your float arm and mess your fuel rating all up. So yeah, make sure all those lines get pushed that way, and then as you push this down and line it all up, you'll be good to go. So just wanted to show that little bit. All right, guys, wanted to show you the finished product. So got everything reinstalled. I've got my hoses connected. Again, my 8 feed and 6 return. This is the 2-pin connector I mentioned that I added. Obviously, I still have yet to put the cover on. I'll wait to do a leak check before I do that. And this obviously passes through that cover with the stock grommet. But this is the stock wire where your stock fuel level connector would be. Cut that off, put a DT on it. That plugs in, and that's good to go. Set down there. And on that side, I've yet to get all my pumps plugged in, but fundamentally, that's the install. From kind of assembling the actual top hat, showing the layout of the whole system, and kind of the tips and tricks that, again, I had found that I feel would make it easier for you guys to do your installs when you get to this point. If you've got any feedback, things I could do better on the videos or explain better, questions I didn't answer, just let me know, post them below. But in any case, I hope this was helpful for you guys. And yeah, don't know what the next one will be, but see you then.